Hello, everyone. To begin today's panel, I would like to start by introducing myself as chair. My name is Indigo Rosen Hunt. I am the assistant curator and producer on this symposium. It's a pleasure to be here today and have the opportunity to talk to you all about some really exciting themes and topics. I spent the past year studying philosophy at UCL. And I've just started to produce a podcast that Deborah heard, and she invited me to come and help her on the Great Imagining. I thought I would also just explain, I'm told that we're going live in 1 minute as well, which is great, but I've started recording anyway. I'm told that I should just also briefly go into what the Great Imagining is. So the Great Imagining is a transformative education program, and as part of the process, we thought it would be amazing if we could engage in intergenerational, multidisciplinary conversations to help cultivate thoughts and ideas in response to the program, essentially. So I would like to present the human ecosystem and how we relate to each other as this panel. We'll be exploring lots of themes in relation to how to build and cultivate community and peaceful societies, as well as reforms that we can enact to help create a kind of a society that we feel that we've shaped more so than is now, essentially. So I would like to ask all of you if you could introduce yourselves. If we could start with...
Sorry, Indigo, we haven't started broadcasting just yet. I'm just going to start broadcasting now.
Sure. Anastasia, if you just message me and then they can introduce themselves once we've actually started.
I'm going to hit broadcast now.
Sure. Is it helpful if I repeat that?
Yes, please. Sorry.
Sure, no problem. It's useful for me to say it twice. Okay, we're officially live. Hi everyone, I'm Indigo Rosen Hunt. I am the assistant curator and producer on the Great Imagining. I spent the past year studying philosophy at UCL. To come and help on just to kind of introduce the Great Imagining as an idea and as a program. It's a transformative educational program, and as part of the process we thought that it would be really useful to engage in a interdisciplinary intergenerational conversation so that we can cultivate thoughts and ideas that will help us shape the program. So I'd like to introduce the human ecosystem, how we relate to others, as the title of today's panel. We'll be exploring lots of ideas relating to community and society and how we might want to build the community and a more peaceful society in the future. To start, I'd like to ask all of my wonderful speakers to introduce themselves. So if Martin, you wouldn't mind starting by giving us an introduction.
Yes, good morning, everyone. My name is Martin Spafford. I was for a long time a history teacher in East London and other places. My special interest is on the one hand, the kind of history of migration to the UK. I've been involved in developing teaching resources and courses around that, and also the interplay of untold stories and social justice and how people have activism for change and social justice. Currently, I'm chair of the charity Journey for Justice.
Amazing, thank you, Martin. Next, if we could have Swithin, if you wouldn't mind giving us a short introduction.
Hello, I'm Swithin Fry. I retired as a teacher of English in the UK further education, I taught in 2010. In late 2011, I saw an ad asking for volunteers to write to people on death row in America. I thought, wow, that sounds like a good thing to do in my retirement. I was allocated, for want of a better word, Tim Coleman on death row in Chillicothe, Ohio. 5 months later, I visited Tim, expecting, the worst, and it was the worst. The conditions in Ohio are not the worst state, but they're pretty damn bad. It changed my life meeting Tim. It really changed my life. For one thing, I started to believe in his innocence. And now I am 100% convinced of his innocence. He's a Black American, which says it all, really. And then that led to me going on stage and performing a solo show about Tim for about 2 years. 2 years ago, I retired to Spain. Okay.
Cool. Thank you, Swithin. Mike, if you wouldn't mind also introducing yourself.
Just unmute. Yeah, I'm also retired. Mike Pryor is my name. I'm a climate emergency activist, I suppose is the best way to describe me, with Culture Declares Emergency. And I'm organising local collaboration here in West Yorkshire in response to the climate emergency. I also volunteer locally with the Asylum Seeker charity. So that's me.
Thank you, Mike. And Pippa?
Good morning, everyone, but actually it's evening with me because I am coming to you from Wongaland, which is in the Eora Nation, which is the Indigenous name for Sydney in Australia. And I have a background in the arts. I've worked for 30 years in the arts as a director and producer and done a whole bunch of things. I spent 15 of those years in the UK, so I kind of understand the context a little bit. And I currently run a social change festival, which is deeply committed to, it's a national celebration of place-based social change, deeply committed to walking alongside Indigenous people and taking direction from Indigenous people and addressing the climate emergency.
Thank you, Pippa.
Lovely to be here.
It's lovely to have you, all of you here actually. Phil, if you wouldn't mind as well.
Hello everyone, lovely to meet you all, morning, evening, nighttime, wherever you're joining us from. So my name's Phil Gittings and I wear, let's say, two hats for the purpose of this course. I'm the education director for a organisation called World Beyond War. We're a membership organisation in 175 countries and we've got a really, really easy task. We're against the war system. So we're against the war system and move towards a just and sustainable peace. So that's one of the hats. The other one is that I'm a founder, executive director of a new organisation called Generations for Change. And we work for change, both in inner and outer change, with a focus on climate change, with a focus on peace, and with a focus on mental health. So lovely to be here with you.
Thank you, Phil. Jess, if you wouldn't mind as well.
Hi, everyone. As Phil says, lovely to meet everyone and nice to be here. My name is Jess Prendergast. I am the founder and co-director of an organisation called Onion Collective, which is a social enterprise based down in Somerset in a small town called Watchet, which no one's ever heard of, which we're quite grateful for. It's a very beautiful place, but very disadvantaged and suffers from some of the kind of worst statistics in the UK in terms of social mobility and wages and productivity, and it's pretty much everything you could list we're at the bottom of. But it's an extraordinary place. So I run Onion Collective. It's a social enterprise. I also run something called Contains Art, another social enterprise. So looking at place-based systems change work across culture, environment and social justice questions.
Thank you, Jess, and Julie as well, if you wouldn't mind giving us an introduction.
Hello, it's really great to be here. There's lots of familiar faces, but some new people too. So my name's Julie Ward. I'm a poet, I'm a protester, I'm a policy maker. So I was working running a social enterprise and artist collective, working with very marginalised communities in the northwest of England, sorry, northeast of England, and we were working internationally, so bringing young people together to talk about common concerns and peace. And then in 2014, I was elected as a member of the European Parliament, which was a great surprise to me. In the Parliament, I was Equality Committee, various other committees and various parliamentary assemblies with other countries, including Bosnia, Herzegovina and Kosovo, and Africa, Caribbean and Pacific countries. And I chose to do my job by putting human rights at the forefront of all my work. And obviously Brexit's happened, so I'm not an MEP anymore, but if you're an activist, you're always an activist. And I'm a peace campaigner, so and I'm on the working group for Culture Declares Emergency, and I'm also co-chair of something called Urban Economy Forum, which sounds very dry and dusty, but actually it's important because what I do there is to promote the role of women and youth in urban economies, and to ensure that culture is one of the main pillars of urban regeneration.
Thank you, Julie. And I really liked those plosives at the beginning: poet, protester, policymaker. That's really cool. Okay, amazing. So I think to give context to my first question, a focus of the Great Imagining is to kind of enable and empower young people, and has a large focus on empowering them in particular to have the agency to build a future that they would like, and in relation to that, build peaceful societies and communities. I think it's important, before we go into that building process and the kind of collaborative efforts that we can make to ensure that, I think it's also important to consider how peace has in this, and learn from them. So that's my first question that I pose to this amazing panel. Would anyone like to start?
I think we would love to hear the whole question. I don't know if it broke up for other people, but
sure.
You were just about to say something and we're all kind of, here it comes, and then it kind of broke up. So please, if you could.
No problem. The question was, I think it's important to, in light of thinking about building peaceful societies in the future, to consider how societies have deteriorated in the past and what we can learn from that. So that is my first question. Did everyone hear? Amazing. Would anyone like to start in particular, to start us off?
Maybe I'll say something then.
Yes, Julie.
I've ended up working in a lot of post-conflict communities. I've also been to northern Syria, and I've met a lot of refugees on borders. And so one of the things that has created conflict is inequality, people not being able to have a sustainable life. So if you don't have access to clean, fresh water, if your crops fail because there's a plague of locusts, or because the rains don't come, or because too much rain comes, all this contributes to a very fragile society. And increasingly, people who are not on the breadline, people who've maybe got a nice little pile of money in the bank and, you know, some pension funds and all the rest of it, want to guard that, want to kind of hang on to it. And so that increasing inequality is a real problem in terms of peace and stability. And then communities that have experienced violence and a deterioration of peace cannot find peace without justice. So even when the war ends, even when the hostilities cease, if the people who were victims, who lost loved ones, who were survivors of massacres, you know, and various atrocities, if those people don't see justice, it's very, very difficult for them to move forward. And sadly, in many countries, what we find is that the people who were running the war are still running the peace.
Definitely. Thank you so much, Julie. And I think, Swithin, you have some really interesting things to say in regards to justice.
I think I can only speak for the UK, really, because I was involved in the education system there. I think the education system, the education curriculum in the UK is way off course. And what I have learned, I'm now in my 70s, what I've learned over the years is that what I consider to be really essential ways of living one's life, they're not taught at school. And I think, well, why the heck not? And that's really what I wanted to say on this one.
Thank you, Swithin. If we could come to Phil and then Martin as well.
Thank you. Well, I firstly congratulate you for starting off with this question. This is a particular question of, you know, real interest to me in terms of what it takes to build peaceful societies. And I'd just like to kind of underscore what the two previous speakers spoke about, highlighting the importance of education, and also Julie in terms of highlighting the inequality gap, which is a big challenge when it comes to peace, and also this idea of justice and peace going together. So there's this idea or a theory of just peace. So you asked what were one of the challenges in terms of peaceful society. So it's something I've done a lot of thinking about and wrote books about. So here's one, here's another, etc., looking at what it is to build peaceful societies. And actually Europe, if we think of putting it into context, has as one of the three priorities for the youth sector, human rights. So Julie will be happy on that one. The second one is youth participation. And the third one is inclusive and peaceful societies. So it recognizes that that has to be a priority. And there's a couple of reasons for that. If you look at the Sustainable Development Goals, there's 17 of them, but the United Nations underscores this idea that you can have no sustainable development without peace. You can have no peace without sustainable development. Part of the reason for that is, in terms of working on all the other sustainable development goals, one of the big challenges getting in the way of that is violence. So if we want to make progress on education, on nutrition, on good health, etc., we have to address the issue of violence. I think the biggest form of violence, and I obviously with my own bias would say this, is that we can't reach, or there's no viable approach to peace or development that doesn't take into account two things. One, the war system. Two, youth participation. So I'll say something about the war system. How is it that we're spending $2 trillion a year on preparing for war and war preparation and war itself? Put that into perspective. It's estimated that it would cost us $30 billion to end hunger and starvation on the planet. And it's estimated that it would cost $11 billion to give the world clean access to drinking water. We're spending so much more on preparing for war than we are for peace. In fact, if you look at the economics of it, where we're spending $2 trillion, 1% of that goes to preparing for peace, by the way. So there's one issue. With regards to youth participation, we now have more young people on the planet than ever before. However, young people have traditionally been left out of peace building work. And in fact, the United Nations recognizes this. They have brought out 3 groundbreaking UN resolutions in the last 3 years, which basically says all countries all around the world need to step up their game in terms of engaging young people more. However, a UN mandated study came out about 2 years ago, which talks about the violence of exclusion. And what they mean by that is that young people continue to be left out. And if people are interested, I'm not making a plug here, but get this book, I write about it, and there's actually free, you can download it free, an article called The Role of Youth in Peace and Security. If you want me to, I can put it on the chat here that you can download for free. So it's not a plug here in terms of buy the book. I'm just interested in getting these ideas out there. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Phil. And I think you've sold the book to me. I'm persuaded, and I really like how our answers so far have really intertwined with each other in regards to young people participation, but also their relationship with education, unprecedented military spending as well, which, as you said, Phil, is kind of actually quite insane to actually hear the numbers as you said it out loud. Phil, if you could put up the reference to your book in the group chat, I think I'm being told. Martin, I know you're a retired teacher, so I wonder if you could speak to youth participation, education, and its relationship with building peaceful societies.
Well, I think it's really interesting that over the summer, when the Black Lives Matter movement took off again in this country, so many of the calls that you saw in the streets and the presence from young people were about what they were being taught in schools. In particular, in their case, focusing on empire. If you look at if you're talking about how did we get this deterioration, I think it's really powerfully important for young people to understand the history of this and the recognition that inequalities and the absence of peace, perhaps in some of the biggest inequalities that we face, racial inequality, wealth and poverty in the world, and the climate emergency, that these are all have a historical cause, and therefore they are not inevitable. They are created by history. And although I'm not for 1 minute saying that these huge inequalities did not exist historically before then, the very big system that we face, and we relate to the points being made by others, are globalized systems of inequality that come from the history of empire and the history of colonization, which remains. And so the movement of resources from parts of the world to other parts of the world historically that created mass poverty in certain areas and built up wealth in others. The racialization of that through the history of empire, enslavement, colonization, and its impact on this, and the extent to which that whole system depended on destruction, environmental destruction, depended on the plundering of resources in unequal ways. All of those factors are massively important to understanding how we've got to the inequalities that we have in the world today, but also potentially how that can be changed. You know, just a simple, you know, as a history teacher, just a simple, powerful understanding that in Tudor times in England, you were more likely to be not to be accepted in society if you were of a different religion than if your skin color was different, because the system of enslavement had not yet created justifications in terms of race and skin color. But those definitions are historically related is itself a very powerful understanding. To understand that there are different perceptions of the relationship of humans and the environment than the Eurocentric one, than the industrial capitalist-based one, is really, really important to an understanding that there are different alternatives. And so to me, there is sort of, if we're talking about peace, two important things. Absolutely, peace has to be alongside justice. Secondly, that peace is not an absence of something, it's something that has to be built and created. And for all of those to happen, a historical understanding of how and why we've come to where we are is really important. And that's why, to conclude, I think it's a really sinister situation that the government have just told schools that in their personal social health and education, they actually have to deny access to schools for many organizations that are critical of the present political structures and systems.
Thank you so much, Martin. And I think you raised something that I definitely had a blind spot with, which is relationship between empire and also neocolonial practice and war now and environmental destruction as well, because I don't think I really had access to learning about lots of different wars in history A level, but we never touched upon the environmental legacy of those things. Pippa, I know you have something you'd like to add, so yeah.
Yeah, no, I just really want to riff off that, because obviously I'm very much on at the end of some of that colonization. I was born in London, so I'm one of the colonizers. I totally, part of being in the UK for 15 years was actually understanding that and understanding structurally what that meant. So I came back to Australia really with this passion for working with our First Nations people and getting out of the way. Actually, one of the things that I've been really, it's been quite a big journey personally, is understanding how much that colonization is taught and learnt and in your expectation about what you can do in the world. And we don't have a great deal of curiosity as a society, either in England or in kind of dominant culture in Australia, for people who are outside the kind of power structures. So we instantly go overseas to other powerful nations. We don't think about the ones that are less powerful often. So I guess, Deborah did ask an Indigenous artist to be here today, and unfortunately he couldn't come. I want to make it really clear that it would have been much better to have somebody Indigenous here than me. But one of the things that I've learnt is that the connection with the natural environment, which is so fundamentally different. It's so not putting human at the center, which I thought was really interesting in terms of the framing of this as being about a human ecology. Actually, in Indigenous cultures, they're not at the center. And the repair that we need to do with our natural environment before it's too late is somehow about breaking down the kind of individualistic and aspirational parts of our culture and really trying to dig into the place that you're in, your relationship to the natural environment around you. The idea that if you're, and I'm going to be very clumsy in this, there's a lot written, please go and look at other people's writing, but the idea that you're in relationship to the natural environment around you, it is your ancestry, you have a huge responsibility to it, and that will then be able to put a future forward, because other people, that responsibility then feeds into the future. And I think we have so much to learn.
Thank you so much, Pippa. And I think what I've picked up on here is that it's very meta. It's, in terms of building peaceful societies and communities, it's a collaboration with the environment and the history of a place, but also with other people. And I think it's interesting to think about our relationship with individualism and how we can maintain that, but also build collaborative communities as well. So I think that's leading to the next question, which is how do we imagine we can build collaborative communities, and also how we can within that empower young people and give them the tools to build collaborative discussions and communities. Swithin, yes.
I think this is kind of harking back to the last question as well, but I think good communication is essential, and that's talking and listening. And I'm a big fan of Marshall Rosenberg's non-violent communication, and relating it back to the penal system, the prison system. Norway, up to 1968, had the typical prison system of everywhere, chaos, absolute chaos. 68, I don't know why they changed, but they changed. And their main focus now is rehabilitation and restorative justice. So restorative justice is about getting the person who the crime was committed on to and the person who committed the crime to get together and talk about it and listen to each other and work it out, if you like. And there in 1968, there, what's it called? When someone reoffends, the reoffending rate in 68, I think, was 98%. It is now 20%, and they are the main country in the world which has the lowest reforming rate of whatever the phrase is.
Reoffending.
Thank you. So I think good, really proper communication is essential, and it should be in the school curriculum.
Thank you, Swithin. And I know also that we have people amongst our speakers who have been at the grassroots of that communication and collaboration with communities. So to them, I would like to pose, I'm thinking Mike and Jess as well, in terms of communication and collaboration at the very kind of grassroots level within a community. Is there anything that you would like to say in regards to that? Yes, Jess.
Yeah, so I think communication is obviously, you know, a central part, but to me is kind of a process. And I guess when we think about how to build stronger communities, what we try and do is make the case that we can't separate what's going on in communities from what's going on in the economy more broadly. And we have, over the last, I guess, 50, 60 years in this country, post-war, sort of attempted to separate economics from society, as if these things are not part and parcel of the same thing, and pair up the point about history is making these things as if we weren't somehow the people who created this whole system and can therefore change or tear it down if we so choose. And within communities, what's really clear and is absolutely fundamental above everything, and the way that you build them, is the question of trust. So trust is like the thing that holds everything together, and is something which our current system has sought quite hard to kind of undo and undermine. Yeah. So for us, I think that's always the starting point. And unless and until you have in some way started to build trust among people within small groups, and then between those groups, one to the other, and then from those groups out to other organizations in a kind of social capital structure, I guess, unless you've got the trust bit down, you're kind of wasting your time on most of the rest. That's not easy, obviously, but I think that's always the kind of starting point. And I think we need to be doing that equally with young people. We have to be saying, you know, you have value and insight, and we should be working to give people agency, but it has to be built on, you know, we believe in you, we trust you, and together we can do something.
Thank you so much, Jess. And totally, I as a young person can vouch that I think with lots of institutions there is a distrust there amongst young people. And I think that relates back to education in feeling as though certain things have been omitted in terms of our curriculum. Mike, I would also love to come to you about building collaborative communities, as I know you have some really insightful things to say.
Yeah, thank you. I think I agree with Jess that this point about trust is so crucial, and it doesn't come overnight, does it? I think Jess hinted it takes time. I think we've got a lot of big global movements. The one I'm active within, Culture Declares Emergency, addressing the climate and ecological emergency, is just one of many. We can all name many global movements at the moment. But the key to me is that you first got to trust in the global movement and its ethics and its stance. But I think you've also got to be able to develop something at a local level. And that's what I think I'm pushing to try to do here in West Yorkshire, is get like-minded arts and cultural organisations, practices and individuals to come together and collaborate in this emergency. And we started back in 2019 with a reading of Letters to the Earth at the local Ukrainian club. And we invited young people from all different ethnic backgrounds in this community to read Letters to the Earth. It was the Culture Declares Emergency call out for Letters to the Earth. And we read some of those to an audience of about 50 mixed people in the Ukrainian club. And that really got it started. And we then engaged with local arts and culture individuals and organisations to create a little local community. And we're collaborating on stuff as we speak. Today is the launch, for example, of the Cosmere Festival, and that's a science fiction festival. Whereas this year, for this next week, it's focusing on the climate and ecological emergency. And we've got young people charities, we've got the library involved in it with books. It's just good to see this declarer movement when declarers are acting on their declaration. So it's not just a thing to say, we declare a climate emergency. We're now going to act over the years in building public awareness and community around this emergency. So that's where we've been active over the last 18 months.
Thank you, Mike. That was a great summary as well. I think at the kind of nucleus of this, I'm seeing trust as almost interrelating lots of the things that we've mentioned, because it's about kind of being able to trust in the government to create policy in regards to the environment, wealth inequality, education, all of those things. So I would like to also pose the question in how can we encourage powerful citizenship to hold our leaders to account and to reinvigorate that contract of trust in society? I think that's my next question.
Do you mind if I speak? Is that okay?
I'd love to speak, Julie.
Yeah, I will answer that question, but I just want to add a few points to the previous commentaries, which you know, are very powerful. We started to talk about generations, and bringing different generations together is really, really important. As we look at society, it's often the people who can't vote, or you know, who maybe haven't got that long to make their vote count, the young and the old, who are really excluded, and who are not listened to in terms of policy making. And when I was an MEP for the Northwest of England, we had an absolutely wonderful campaign initiative called Generations United Against Austerity. And it was where the students of the city, you know, who couldn't actually afford, you know, to sort of pay the rent and put food on their table, came together with a lot of the elders in the community who were also struggling to, you know, keep warm during winter, and together they campaigned and protested, but through that process actually learnt more about each other and sort of developed that and developed that mutual respect. So finding ways where people can come together around common issues, I think, is really important, because what leaders want to do, what the powerful want to do, is to divide us. They want to divide us and distract us away from dealing with some of these huge issues that we need to tackle together. I wanted to return a little bit to policy ideas and measures really for peace that build on what I said earlier. I was invited to an extraordinary conference in Kathmandu 18 months ago, 2 years ago, and the title of it was Universal Social Protection for Peace. And this was about recognizing that for the poorest people, you know, any uncertainty in their income instantly sets up this this potential for conflict, and so we have to be pushing for some, you know, better safety nets for everybody. And during this pandemic, it would have been an absolutely brilliant opportunity for governments to bring in universal basic income. They've kind of done it anyway, because, you know, they've been bailing out, they've been paying wages and all the rest of it. But actually, universal basic income would have been a fantastic way of recognizing that everybody has some basic needs, that we need to be able to pay for those things. And then beyond that, maybe we won't be so stressed out, and we can then give to our community. I also think that free education is really important, and so I'm speaking today thinking about the world, and I'm thinking about all the people who can't afford to go to school. Kids here in the UK now have to pay a huge amount of money to access higher education. But there are, and yet there are so many people who've got so much to offer, and for whom education would be that key to unlocking not just their own future, but a key to solving many of the problems in our society. The City of Sanctuary movement, which is a wonderful movement to welcome refugees here in the UK, has a stream called Universities of Sanctuary, and what they're doing is finding ways and means for refugees to have scholarships so that they can continue their education. But as I was thinking about that, I was thinking about how many girls are not at school, and they're not at school because they don't have access to sanitary protection, for example, or decent toilets. Kids now, we've got a huge crisis here in the UK because it's half term next week, and the government has refused to give children free school meals, and yet parents have already been struggling to put food on the table. So, and I do remember, I've got 2 children, and I can remember my kids' first teacher saying to me about my little boy, he'll learn if he's happy. And so making sure that schools are places where kids are fed, watered, looked after, can play, can enjoy each other's company is really, really important. But that ought to be true for the whole of the education cycle, not just when you first go to school at age 5, being able to be in that environment and be active, be in an active learner mode. I think it's really, really important. And if we're in active learner mode, and we have a broad curriculum, and we have and we give teachers freedom to to deliver inspiring lessons. And in this respect, I think I want to pay tribute to Samuel Paty, the French history teacher who was murdered for giving a civics class on freedom of expression. We need to liberate our educators, our teachers too, to be those inspiring people, and we need to value questioning and interrogation. And then just to sort of complete the circle, one of my fellow speakers was just talking about economics, like why are we not learning about, economics is all part of this. Well, in Manchester, there was a class of economics undergraduates who went to ask the university if they could learn about post-crash economics. They wanted to understand why the global economic crash had happened. And they had a teacher, an amazing professor who had studied this and who was willing to give the class. And the university said no. So the teacher went, okay, I'll give the class to the whole of the community. I'll put it online. I'll make my research sources open so that everybody can learn about my research into post-crash economics. That group of students ended up complaining and protesting to their university. They ended up in The Guardian, and they set up the Post-Crash Economics Society. And that teacher, who actually, he was on some really uncertain short-term contract, and he rocked the boat, at a Russell Group university, and his contract wasn't renewed. But of course, somebody snapped him up like that, because he was thinking about the future. He was already interrogating things that had gone wrong in the past and wanted to pass on that sense of interrogation to his students. So Post-Crash Economics Society still exists, and I've put up a link to it in the chat, and you can set one up in your own universities and in your own places of learning, and I would urge you to do that.
I throw something in, if I may, to this one? It's just sort of following on this. It's kind of to do with the last two questions, both how we hold the powerful to account, but also working with young people. Just working as a teacher, one of the kind of a journey I've been on of kind of understanding, I would say what's really important is that how the process of learning actually happens. And I think many things to add to what's been said. One is that the voices that young people hear, the stories that are told to them, need to so powerfully include the voices of the unheard. And a teacher's responsibility to find and enable those voices is a huge responsibility. You know, back in around 2010 or 2020, 11, 12, when there was a big thing about the history curriculum in Britain, and Michael Gove came up with a whole list of, he basically came up with a whole list of men with swords and guns. But what was really interesting about it, it was all about the politics. It was all political history. It was all about the politics of power. And none of it was about the voices of the oppressed, none of it was the voices of the unheard, none of it was the voices of women, and so on. But the second point is that the process of learning and how the power structures work in that classroom or learning environment are really, really important. And if somebody talks about decolonizing education, and what they just mean is they still see children as vessels just to be filled with alternative facts, that isn't decolonizing education. That's colonizing minds with a decolonizing ideology. Decolonizing has to be about how the power of the control of learning is actually shared and passed on, and how learners become a sense of that collaborative sense of working together to educate themselves. So if you're going to hold the powerful to account, you're going to hold government to account. But the question is who holds them to account, and what is their own experience of learning being? It can't be just a matter of, you know, we have to learn differently. And if we can learn to learn differently and share that, then our experience provides an alternative way of understanding the world. And I think that's very, very important.
Can I add to that? Oh, sorry.
Can I just say, can we go to Pippa and then Phil, and then if I could ask one last question, and then we'll go to the Q&A. Is that okay? Great. Okay, Pippa.
I think the other thing, and I'm sure both Jess and, well, others, Mike too, will agree to this, that, you know, some of this stuff feels incredibly big and overwhelming. You know, we instantly go to this, and, you know, that's partly what school's for, right? Is to kind of have the world opened to you. And the whole world is probably in your local neighborhood. The whole world is in the streets around you. Those unheard voices are the neighbors that you didn't meet yet. And so there's also something really, really important, and kind of building on what I was saying before about the sort of indigenous approach to place, is we're very pressured to think about being aspirational and kind of getting out of our immediate environment and going to the bigger place and going into the world, and, you know, all of that. And actually there's something really wonderful about being able to find the beauty and the amazing stories and the preciousness of the place that you're in, and the specialness of the place that you're in, and actually that, and then curiosity for other people who have different places from you, and what does that look and feel like. And so for me, that's what community, and that's very much the work that I'm involved with, is how do we really bed into place and make that the focus of this kind of new world order.
Thank you so much, Pippa, and completely. And Phil as well. I don't want to talk too much because I want you guys to get the chance to answer.
Thank you. So yeah, some wonderful points made by colleagues around different issues. So just like to ditto and underline, you know, what was said. I think tying to the focus of what we're here for today in terms of under that umbrella of imagination, I think is a good starting place just to think about, well, what should education look like? And it's kind of come up, right? And so we've got, of course, the Sustainable Development Goals, but that's till 2030. UNESCO are doing some work right now around what should education look like in 2050. So they asked me to speak some time back and provide some thoughts on what I think it should look like in terms of moving forward. And I think one starting place for most education is to help prepare students to how did I write it? Let me just, so I'm precise here. What sort of future would you want to live in? That's a starting place for most kind of education. What kind of future do we want to live in? And I agree with Martin in terms of it's important to look at the past and to look at the present. I think a lot of education is focused on that, although not to the extent that it should be, Martin. I think I want to make a bigger call that the education should be focused more on helping people imagine a better future, you know, and I think in order to do that, I think there's at least two parts. One is that we can think of, we want to hopefully students, young people, or whoever goes through education to come out as change makers, as agents of change, to make a difference to the structures that they're embedded in, right? So if you follow Marx and things like this, he said that the idea of the world is not to understand it, but to change it. And that's what I said, and I think that's right. That's definitely true. However, you can't change it unless you understand it. So I think that's the second part of education, that understanding the structures that you're embedded in. And then I made another argument that I think education should be both timely and timeless. If we're just thinking about timely, we'd all be computer programmers, we'd all be technology experts, right? But I don't think that's necessary that all of us be technology experts. What would be helpful in terms of education is helping young people, and I think other people have brought it up, engage with things which are going to happen in your life. So what are things that are constant in your life? One is resilience. The ability to deal with different crises, you know, and be resilient to those crises is a skill and is something we should be looking at school. I'm not too sure we are. Another thing that's just constant in life, conflict. Every single person on the planet deals with conflict. Another thing, to totally agree, Martin, power. Understanding power, you know, how it's used, how it's exercised, how it's not just a bad thing, how it's used to bring about the power of change. I think these should be things we should be looking at in terms of education. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Phil. And thank you to everyone. I think we've had this kind of lovely tapestry of conversation and has put so much together for myself and for our audience and anyone who sees this as well. So my last really quick question, because we do have questions in our Q&A box from our audience, which is amazing. And maybe I will, if you guys could summarize for me, in light of our conversation, what does the great imagining mean to you, and how do you kind of envision we can use elements of this conversation and incorporate them into our program? That is the.
Can I
think.
Oh, sorry, Jess. You go first.
Broken up slightly. Jess, sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, sorry. I think we lost you in the middle of whatever you were saying, Indigo. But I think, kind of related to what's been being discussed in the previous answer. The response in terms of what could be possible within schools and what the great imagining means is kind of in some ways is really the same as the one which is about collective action and accountability. That the way to do any of these things is about growing individual agency. So until we can have our own agency as individuals and think that we can participate on equal terms, we kind of fail at collective agency. We don't do collective action very well if we don't even believe that we can do things for ourselves. And so for me, this kind of sense in which asking these questions and having these discussions is really about embedding in young people through the education system the sense that they can do anything. They can ask any questions. They can be involved in any of these discussions. And I think that's the bit that's really, really missing. So even in a place, you know, even where I am, where there's a huge amount of community work goes on here. There's been some, you know, really very serious, hard, place-based social action work over, you know, decades, but still the sense of individual agency is really low. So people think that collectively they can do stuff. People believe that this community, when it's together, can change things. They don't believe they can. They still think, I can't do anything. I'm not valuable enough. I don't make a big part of this, or my personal position isn't useful. And I think that lots of that is related, as all of these things are in my view, is related to the way also that we run the economy, and the way that we don't make any connection between the community and the economy, because we've been foisted this sense that individualism matters, that self-interest is our nature somehow, which is clearly nonsense, like clearly not true. But we are told over and over again, you are self-interested, greedy individuals who should be independent, not part of something bigger and more collectively. And I think that plays out, and it makes people think, but I don't feel like that. If I don't feel I can change anything, then there's nothing else. So I think it's about agency, you know, on all these levels. And for young people, that's about, you know, getting young people to understand that they can have a say in all of these things, and then they're not passive.
Thank you, Jess. I completely hear you as well. I think we're so taught that selfishness is innate, even though we have so much that says the contrary just all around us. And I think even the Great Imagining as a concept refutes that idea. So yes, thank you for that answer. Swithin, I know you also had an answer to what the Great Imagining could mean.
Well, it's quite interesting, I think, because I'm also a bit of an advocate of self-interest, in that I think in order to change society, we have to change ourselves first, and we have to live the change that we want to see in the world. And I think, you know, that is a big starting point, along with non-violent communication.
Completely, Swithin. It's almost as though that kind of desire to develop oneself is also relates back to collaboration, because I want to develop myself in so I can help others as well. So yeah, I think that's a nice nuance as well. Amazing. We have, oh, okay, we'll come to Mike, and then if we could do our,
just add a little one.
Sure. Okay. Yes, let's hear from two more people who want to answer that question, and then we have to go to our Q&A because we have some really interesting questions. So if we could go to Mike and then Julie, and then our Q&A.
Okay. Yeah, just really quickly, that triggered for me both what Jess and Swithin said, is the power of an individual moment, either from a teacher or from a book or a poem. I remember at university I studied Buddhism, and the teacher was incredibly dynamic, and he raised a book. It sounds quite a hippie-ish book now. It was called Doing Your Own Being by a writer called Baba Ram Das. And this book was all about what we've just been saying, that unless you have the individual agency first, I think sometimes we can jump to the collaboration and the big movements before we've sorted ourselves out. And I think helping children to really have that agency, as Jess put it, is really fundamental, and something I'll hold on to, and just reminds me that it's not all about collaboration, but you need to sort things out with, you know, within the individual too.
Thank you, Mike. And if we come to Julie and then our Q&A.
Okay, I wanted to give people some hope, really, because I was on a call with some climate strikers about 2 weeks ago, a Fridays for Future group, and actually the biggest issue for them, and the thing they wanted to talk about most, was getting the vote. Right, they weren't, you know, they know all the green stuff, right? Teach the future, and they know about all the targets, and they know what we must do, and all the rest of it. And actually, they know that until they get the vote, that's not gonna, you know, they can't put that kind of pressure on. So I was really heartened by that. I was really heartened that those campaigners had made the connection between the fact that they were disenfranchised until they were 18. So encouraging changes in our electoral system is really, really important, and making sure that young people have a vote. Regarding other mechanisms, there's a wonderful organisation called Investing in Children that was set up in County Durham that ensured that all children, including children with disabilities, including children with learning disabilities, were consulted about every single service that was being delivered for them. So education, health, leisure, sports clubs, youth service, transport, the whole lot. And I know about this because as an artist, I was asked to do the research and the participatory consultation with, in fact, the children with profound disabilities. And this organisation, Investing in Children, now works nationally and internationally. So it's a best practice organisation about really, really listening. And then if I just say something about great imagining, what it means for me is that the arts give us the means to rehearse for change. You know, I was a theatre practitioner, and we all need stories, we all need symbols, and we all need to practice different futures, different realities, and to practice and rehearse how we can talk to people that we don't agree with. And for me, the arts is the best vehicle to do that, whether it's through drama, whether it's through dance and movement, or, through visual mechanisms, particularly and increasingly working outdoors in the environment. So, and I am somebody who, as a teenager, failed everything, discovered youth theatre, and it changed my life. It gave me the agency and the power that you've been talking about, but I didn't get it in the formal school curriculum. And so, we've also got to understand that educators are not just people in schools, but they're also those significant others around us.
Thank you so much, Julia. And I think that was a lovely point to end us on before our really quick Q&A, focusing on youth empowerment, which runs so parallel to the Great Imagining. And thank you to all of our speakers. If I could just remind the audience, although we've only got 10 minutes left, if you do have a question, if you could write it in the Q&A function, that would be incredibly helpful. I know that, Phil, you have said that you're going to answer our first question live. So this question, which has definitely been touched upon, but Phil, if you'd like to go into a bit more detail. Elsa Lee says that she's interested to hear what our speakers think schools should be doing that they're currently not doing. So Phil, if you would like to take away.
First of all, I want to do a shout out that I think schools are doing the best that they can do at the moment, and it's really worth recognising that teachers are trying very, very hard. They're under so much pressure right now. I don't think it's often a problem with the actual individual teachers. I think sometimes it's an issue with the broader kind of system that they're part of and the pressure that they're under in terms of we must conform to this particular curriculum, and then they have to follow that curriculum. So I think one of the things that we can think about maybe looking at changing or challenging is having a rethink, and actually there's a great movement, particularly in the US and other places, rethinking schools right now in terms of what should be taught. And of course, and I think it's been brought up by other people in terms of it's not just about what is taught, as in the content. We really need to look at how we're teaching and how we're facilitating learning. And I think along those lines, while the focus has been on working with young people, I think a great focus needs to be on teacher training, and a great focus needs to be on youth work literacy in terms of how to work with young people more effectively. And I think we need to have a rethink about what we should be including in the curriculum. And I think the Great Imagining is a great idea because it looks at the future. Elise Spalding, who is known as one of the, let's say, mothers of peace studies, she talked about the 200-year present. And I think that's really interesting in terms of looking at the past 200 years, and Martin might say we need to go back further than that, and that's fine, you know, but that gives us a framework. So 200 years before, in the past, and 200 years in the future would be one way, because there's this idea of, we spoke about generations. How about looking at working with current generations to get us thinking about 7 generations? So there's this work, right, around 7 generations, how we should be thinking about bringing about a world in 7 generations' time. I think that's a good way of thinking about it. You're on mute.
I'm mute. That was I knew that was going to happen at some point. Thank you, Phil. Our next question comes from Sari, who is a primary school teacher, and their question is, with many change-making networks emerging, how can we ensure that there is more collaboration between groups, particularly in a post-COVID context? Does the local council play a role in creating a community hub? Mike says that he's going to answer this question, so take it away, Mike.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think the place-based initiative like a community hub is a great way to ensure collaboration between different groups. We ran in March, just before the lockdown in Huddersfield, we ran a small pop-up for 6 days with 28 different events from arts and cultural organisations, some national like the Climate Museum UK, and others from local university people and the library and the museum, etc. And it was a great way to engage people. It was inspired by 2 bigger events really that are done in collaboration with local councils. The Camden Think and Do, which Farhana Yamin is very instrumental in, and that's continuing with a lot of council support. Ours had just a £500 budget from Cohesion Kirklees, a council budget, to get us started, but it needs much more funding to do it on a long-term basis and to keep the energy. And in Leeds, Paul Chatterton is, he's a professor of geography at Leeds University, and he's setting up now 8 community hubs because he's got the budget and he's got the influence and also the passion to engage the public in different things, whether it's the climate emergency or whether it's Black Lives Matter issues, whatever that is. Community hubs are great place-based places to do it.
Definitely. Thank you, Mike. Our next question comes from Bridget, and that's kind of how we navigate between the government telling schools not to use resources that in effect criticize their current political standpoint. Is there a particular way that we can navigate that? Is our question from Bridget. Anyone is open to answer. Martin, yeah.
Well, just to say, we have to oppose this. It's really, really serious. I mean, alongside that, we had Kemi Badenoch, the Minister for Equalities in Parliament, basically saying if Black Lives Matter's opinions are put in schools without a direct, equal time to something opposing that, it would actually be illegal. And the PSE guidance that's gone to schools, which is essentially saying not only that schools should not use any materials that are critical of capitalism, but also that they should not use any materials produced by an organization which is critical of capitalism. I think, how do we navigate it? I'm just thinking backwards, if you think of, go back a few generations when it was a similar thing which was said, well, you should not argue that it was dangerous to health to smoke cigarettes, to smoke tobacco, unless you had equal space for somebody who argued that it was not dangerous, for example. This is really, really serious. And what makes it more dangerous is it's put within a document, which is also taking positions that, one might support, which is example, that racist views should not be promulgated to children. In the end, essentially what it's saying is criticize the system and you're breaking the law, or get children to criticize it and you're breaking the law. And I think this is partly a response. I know I go back a lot to the Black Lives Matter movement because I think actually that freaked the government. And because what it freaked is it was actually saying, and Extinction Rebellion was doing a similar thing, was saying we have to look at endemic systems. Both those movements have been saying that, and the government is scared of that. And so they try to say, yes, we're in favor, we're against, we're in favor of dealing with the climate emergency. Yes, we're against racism, but it's about individual behavior. It's not about systems. And anything which is going to criticize systems, they want excluded from that. To freak teachers and particularly school managers into feeling that they're in danger if they in these spheres is really dangerous. And I think how do we navigate it? We have to oppose it. I go back to Section 28 in the 1980s, and how I was supposed not to present homosexual relationships as being a viable family unit, a viable relationship. What actually happened in reality was loads of this in schools took no notice. How do we navigate it? It absolutely must not hold this. It's got to stop. And to conclude, I know that the solicitors' bindmans are taking up a case, and there's going to be a legal challenge to this. And if anybody knows people in schools who can tell bindmans examples of how they see the impact of this will work on them in schools or other educational institutions, I can put in the chat what the link is, and also a document explaining what the legal challenge is.
Thank you so much, Martin. Jess, if you could say our finalising point, because we are out of time.
Oh, so I just wanted to say, I actually wasn't aware of this, and I'm flabbergasted. But I think the thing to say, which is perhaps it's not all bad, is that if the government is feeling the need to put this in, like this feeling the need to try and constrain teachers from teaching post-capitalist or degrowth agendas and so on, like you've got to think they're worried. You've got to think that. And when the system starts reacting like that, they're scared. And that's a good thing, because that means things are really starting to change. And so it's terrible, but also like there's a little bit of me that's kind of delighted that things are maybe shifting.
Amazing. And I'm delighted by the conversation and where it's taken us as well. Thank you so much to our amazing panelists, and thank you to everyone who's watched live and has submitted some really brilliant questions that have taken the conversation to other dimensions as well. So yes, this is the end of the human ecosystem. How do we relate to each other panel, although I'm sure there will be more panels to come, especially in light of what I can say is the absolute success of this panel. So again, thank you to my speakers, thank you to those who asked questions. Stay posted, everyone, on social media for more events. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, thanks.
Thank you.
Great,
Bye.
thank you.
Thank you. Bye, everyone. Have a great day.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, Indigo.